Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
A very good morning and a warm welcome once again to Money Sense. Your hosts this morning are Christophe Barnett and myself, Simon Cordery.
Good morning.
Morning, Christophe. We're delighted to be joined in the studio this morning by Steve McIntosh. Steve is the CEO of CML, a company known to many on the island as it provides recruitment services to companies and helps individuals find jobs. Steve, thank you very much for joining us this morning and welcome to Money Sense.
Thanks for having me, Simon. It's a pleasure. Can I just say, I'm a huge fan of the show.
Well,
love it. You guys do a great job. I just have one question.
Uh-oh.
Which one of you is Blake and which one is Erin?
We'll flip a coin.
That's a different station. We have no idea what you're referring to. Goodness me. Our producer's growling at us now for talking about a different radio station. Okay, so Steve, tell us just a little bit of, help us just inform the listeners exactly what it is you do, and then when we can talk a little bit more about the state of the economy and recruitment in the Cayman Islands and what it means for the skill levels of people and what sort of skills they need to have as they want to become competitive in the economy that we have today.
Sure.
So just tell me a little bit about the background of yourself.
So I'm a recovering accountant. I moved to the island 15 years ago with KPMG. I was 5 years in audit for my sins. Co-founded CML in 2004. And so we specialise in legal, accounting, IT recruitment for the financial services industry.
Great, and I think one of the reasons we wanted to talk with you is you and I were having a conversation a few days ago, and one of the areas that we haven't talked about on the show is it's all very well having understanding of whether it be the banking sector, the investment sector, the fund sector. There are a lot of people who are interested in potentially getting involved in those sectors, and they want to know, well, what sort of skills do I want? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But perhaps let's just start off from your perspective. When you go around and you talk to the CEOs of various companies and hear what their recruitment plans are and their plans are, what's your take and your perspective on the state of the Cayman economy right now?
It's a tough one. I think there's no question that we have reasonable economic growth, you might say. So we have a modest amount of economic growth. But I think when you're looking at the economy, it's not helpful to view the economy as a monolith. What we have is a lot of diverse industry sectors here. And if you, like all of us, are in the financial services industry, the growth in the tourism industry, for example, isn't directly benefiting your career and your industry sector. So you really need some kind of breakdown by industry sector. And so I think rather than looking at whether or not we have economic growth, the two questions that I would focus on are, do we have enough growth, and is the growth in the areas that we want it to be in?
Okay,
I would say.
Well, since you asked two questions, we're duty bound to ask you to answer your own questions. Do we have enough growth, and is it in the right areas?
I would say no. I would say I think the growth that's been talked about is unambitious. I think there's no reason that Cayman couldn't have a higher level of economic growth. But I think the growth that we have, to me, is mostly in sectors that many people would prefer. They'd prefer to do other things. I think a lot of Caymanians and a lot of young people want to work in the financial services industry, and it's not growing very rapidly. And what's happening is that it's becoming more focused on the types of job that require professional qualifications, which not everyone can get. And what's happening is we're losing a lot of the administrative jobs that have always been a great source of employment here in the Cayman Islands.
Now, you say, one thing I want to pick up on there, you say we're requiring jobs that require professional qualifications and not everyone can get. Is it the case not everyone can get them, or not everyone has them? Because there is a subtle difference between, because one can get a professional qualification with the right study and the right training, potentially.
You're right, but I think you've got to be realistic that when someone graduates high school, for example, they're going to have graduated with a certain level of academic achievement, and some people will have the level of academic achievement that's required to go on to further study in university and ultimately professional qualifications, and some people won't, and it's better for them to go into trades and other types of profession. Okay,
so the point I'm hearing from you is that there needs to be an opportunity for those who are not going to have the professional qualifications, who have other skills, whether it be marketing skill, whatever sort of skills they
Absolutely.
are, and create jobs and opportunities for them. And what sort of areas, when you talk to CEOs of big companies on Ireland or smaller companies on Ireland, what sort of areas of opportunity do you see as being available were those people to have the right sort of skills?
I think if you have the right skills, there's an opportunity in any industry. And I think one of the issues that we've had here in the Cayman Islands in the past, from what I've observed, is too much focus on a narrow set of career paths. I think young people need to be encouraged to follow their passion and to find a job that reflects their own interest and their own skill set, rather than being encouraged to apply for jobs where people believe that you will make a lot of money.
Right.
I think that's not helping their quality of life ultimately.
One of the observations that we had coming into this show was that Cayman has an awful lot of people involved in processing and administration, and not many decision makers are here in Cayman. In other words, there's a huge range of people who are doing services for the hedge fund industry, but very few hedge fund managers. A lot of the legal professionals, a lot of the accounting, a lot of the audit, a lot of the fund administration professionals, even the directorship industry, all about providing services to people who are making decisions elsewhere. And that presumably is a risk to the economy, because those decision makers can always choose somewhere else.
Absolutely, it's a double-edged sword.
So when we talk about this, then where would you encourage people to get training or skills in? In other words, if these areas, these administrative roles, are going to disappear in some respect, where should they be thinking about other opportunities as being?
I don't think those jobs are necessarily going to disappear, but I think if the system doesn't change to allow them to be here, then there's a very good chance that they will leave, much as the fund administration industry has declined in the Cayman Islands, because the cost of doing that work is much, much cheaper in other locations.
Right, so when you say the system has to change, what do you mean by that?
I mean, companies need to be allowed to operate and grow here, and someone needs to focus on the price differential. As you said, these are companies who, for the most part, oftentimes do not need to be here in the Cayman Islands. They don't need to be in the backyard of their own customer, which is a double-edged sword. It means that they can move here in the first place, but it also means that they can easily leave. And we need to do what's required to keep them here in the Cayman Islands.
And so the message you're hearing when you talk to human resource managers and bosses of these companies is there are clearly mumblings or murmurings that they're thinking about the opportunities elsewhere because of certain impediments to doing business in Cayman.
I'd go beyond that and say that they're... What's normally the case is that a head office in an overseas jurisdiction who doesn't necessarily care about the Cayman Islands economy, right? And why should they? If the head office of a company is based in Canada, they're not necessarily going to be doing the right thing, in inverted commas, for the Cayman Islands. Sure. And what happens is that overseas head office is going to be looking at the cost of doing business in the Cayman Islands and saying, why is it so darned expensive to hire these people in the Cayman Islands? And how do we get this cost down? And the higher that cost becomes, the more likely that job is to simply move overseas.
You think, if from your perspective, then the cost of doing business here in Cayman is too high. And how would you break down that cost? Is it because of the cost of employing people, the cost of getting people on island, the cost of living on island? Where would you break that cost down?
I mean, it's in the cost of employing people, whether that's because you're paying higher salaries because of an element of the cost of living, but that's not all there is to it. But it's also, I think, because of the government's misguided attempts to micromanage the employment market. Right, there are a lot of restrictions on hiring here, which are designed to benefit Caymanians, but in the long term do them harm. And I think that's we've seen this arc, if you like, in relation to the fund administration industry. That's the poster boy for everything not to do to foster the growth of an industry and create jobs for Caymanians. Those jobs have, to a large extent, we must have lost 1,000 jobs in the last 10 years in fund administration, and many of those jobs were Caymanians. Do
you want to, perhaps not everyone who's listening to this is familiar with the fund administration industry and familiar with the argument you're making. Do you want to just sort of press the situation that actually arose in your perspective?
Sure. I mean, fund administration, when When CML first got started in 2004, I would say 70 or 80% of our business was fund administration. This was a booming industry. It employed professionals, mostly accountants, but it also, most fund administrators at that time had about 50% professional staff and 50% what you might call administrative staff. And what happened was that it was mainly immigration restrictions on who fund administrators could hire. It just became more and more expensive for fund administrators to operate here, while other jurisdictions jealously looked on and wondered how we can get all these great financial services jobs. So the example that I always come back to is the development agency in Nova Scotia Business Inc., who did a wonderful job coming here once a quarter, meeting with all of our fund administrators and asking them what it would take to get them to move to Nova Scotia. And one by one, they started to move to Nova Scotia. If it costs $70,000 to employ someone in the Cayman Islands and it costs $30,000 to employ them in Halifax, then that's a fairly straightforward decision for a company to make. And
as a result, in your words, hundreds and hundreds or potentially thousands of jobs were migrated away from Cayman back or over to Canada. Now, one argument might be, well, those were generally speaking expats who are working here. Did we lose many local jobs in that industry?
Definitely.
Okay. Yep. Fair enough. Now, take that argument then to the next stage, and I want to ask you, well, where else do you see being most at risk then? Where's the next Nova Scotia Inc. Who's on island, who's saying, hey, we can provide a better platform, cheaper platform for this particular industry? So where else do you see as being particularly exposed?
I think what's changing now is the world of work generally, very rapidly, because what's now happening is remote working is becoming more and more common. The idea that the Cayman Islands government or authorities are able to regulate who a company employs their ability to regulate it is diminishing because of a company's ability to put people anywhere. And I don't just mean, they could put them in their office in Halifax or they could put them in their office in the Cayman Islands. There's no reason they couldn't put them in their apartment in Miami. People can be based anywhere. And this is the threat. It's not so much to entire departments or entire companies, but it's job by job. Because, to give you an example, I don't know if you guys have ever used a website called Elance. Elance is a website where you can go and it's the electronic freelancer, right? Elance. And you can post a job and people from all over the world will bid on doing this job. Now, it's mostly used for creative industry type work, so graphic design, creative writing and so on. But you can have someone do a job for $5 an hour. They might be in Romania, they might be in Brazil, they might be anywhere. But this sort of illustrates a couple of problems that the Cayman Islands has. First of all, if I can get someone in Romania to do a graphic design job for $5 an hour, then if I can't get that job done to a required standard in the Cayman Islands, I can very easily outsource it. We didn't have that capability 10 years ago, but now we do. Every single person in the CML office works on a laptop. All of our systems and platforms are cloud-based. It's very easy, so people work from home frequently. I frequently work from coffee shops. You'll see me around town and working from coffee shops. And anytime anyone goes on vacation, they just pick up their laptop and go. And this has increasingly become the norm. And what happens is, if the Cayman Islands government doesn't allow companies to hire the people they need, then it becomes very tempting for that company to say, okay, you're originally from Vancouver, Halifax, London, go do your job from there.
Sure. Well, we're going to pick up on that particular line of conversation. In other words, what can or what should, in your opinion, the government be doing to encourage companies to be able to hire people here? We'll pick up on that after the break if we can. But we do need to take a short break now. So rejoin us, please, in 2 minutes. Welcome back. In the second half of today's show, we are going to continue our conversation with Steve McIntosh about the state of Cayman and the future of employment on the island and the opportunities for Caymanians. Steve, before we went to a break, you had mentioned that there could be opportunities with higher levels of economic growth. Economic growth as a concept is something that's perhaps misunderstood in many people's eyes, or not understood at all because it's perhaps not explained terribly well. And I don't want to segue too nicely for you, but I know that you have been part of a working group that's been trying to help put together some material to help people understand what economic growth is.
Yeah,
so perhaps
right.
you could just give us a little bit of explanation as to that.
Sure. So I've been part of a team at the Chamber of Commerce that's been working on a series of animated videos that explain how the economy works. And the rationale from this came from exactly as you say. It's just economic growth is one of those things that is not widely understood. What is it?
Or people half our listeners may have fallen asleep at the very word economic growth.
Oh, absolutely. But what we wanted people to understand is that although this seems like an abstract concept, this is very directly related to the standard of living. And this is something, and individual prosperity, right? So most people would say they don't feel very connected to economic growth as a concept, but they certainly feel connected to their own prosperity. And the message in this video series is very much that individually we can't become more prosperous as a nation unless the economy grows.
Interesting. And in your game, and how does one communicate that in a series of animations?
Well,
I guess watch the animations and find out.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, we've been working with a professional animation company. We've made a series of 10 videos, and it sort of breaks down the economy into various stages and shows how money flows through a company, for example, and becomes one of 4 economic outputs, 3 of which are nothing but a benefit to the general public: salaries, taxes, and the money that I say taxes, I mean government fees, obviously, in the Cayman Islands.
Don't use such words, too.
Yeah. And the money that company spends with other companies in Cayman circulating around the economy. So we try to show how money flows around the Cayman Islands economy and starts in the private sector that creates the wealth in the first place, sometimes goes through the government, but oftentimes goes directly to members of the public as salary and benefits and a job.
Sure. Before we went to a break, you had said that the conditions for creating economic growth here, and obviously let me pause for a second. Once you've created these animations and people have watched them, there'll be people will have an understanding as to what economic growth is, and hopefully, in your perspective, why it's a good thing. Mm-hmm. So, taking the assumption that people agree that economic growth is a positive thing, what do you think needs to be done or should be done by our elected representatives in order to help prosper economic growth?
I think first and foremost they need to fix the immigration system. You know, everyone says the most confounding thing about the immigration system is that it doesn't work any better for Caymanians than it works for employers, right? The question I'm always asking is, who does this system work for? Because most Caymanians complain about it every bit as much as employers do. And I think it's not beyond fixing. It just needs to be. If you look at what Caymanians want to get from an immigration system, naturally enough, the first thing I think they want is protection against discrimination. I think they're absolutely right to expect it, but the problem is that that's not actually part of the mandate of the immigration department. It just doesn't work that way. And there really isn't a good mechanism here in Cayman for a job applicant or an employee who feels discriminated against to take steps to resolve that. And I think that's a huge problem. And I think it's a reason that Caymanians ought to want the immigration system to be changed so that it works better for them and gives them better access to jobs. But it needs to be more transparent. So the decisions that are made need to be comprehensible by Caymanians and by employers. Whereas right now, it's kind of this black box process where, you know, all the documents get submitted and a decision gets handed down, and a lot of the time you're not really sure why that decision was made, and there's no appeals process for Caymanians, for example. So if you're a Caymanian who applied for a job and you don't get that job, and you know there's nowhere you can go to say, I believe that I was discriminated against, or I believe I didn't get a fair shot at that job. That needs to change.
Do you think Cayman needs more immigration and more foreigners doing jobs here?
I wouldn't put it like that. I think we need economic growth. And that's kind of our series is all about why you want economic growth. The way I would put it is that companies need to be allowed to grow, and if they can't hire, companies must make every effort to identify Caymanians, to train Caymanians, and I think there is more that could be done. But there's also more that could be done to facilitate that process. And one of the things that I liked about the current government was when the Premier first took office, he emphasised this approach of using carrots and not sticks. I don't think we've seen enough of the carrots. And I don't mean carrots in the form of incentives. I just mean assistance. So, for example, what's the best practice here? What should companies be doing to avoid inadvertently discriminating? What should they be doing to avoid unconscious bias? Do employers even know what unconscious bias is? Not for the most part. This could be an education process, and I think once the education process has reached its limit, that's when regulation needs to kick in.
And you talk about carrots, and I think, Christoph, you and I were discussing about what incentives local people need to help get the skills that employers would value.
Well, earlier in the year, we were doing a series just on different parts of the financial services industry. And we always, we make comments, and we recognize the fact that, half the economy is finance related. But it's not necessarily that easy to just wake up and say, I want to work in finance. So what are the strategies and opportunities beyond just the normal submitting a resume? But what skills should people be working on? And what are the strategies people should take to get involved?
Honestly, I think the skills that are required to be successful in financial services are the same skills that are required to be successful in almost anything, right? And I think any form of work as a young person, you might not see the relationship, but one of the things that always strikes me when I'm speaking to business leaders in Cayman is that everyone started off with some crummy job, right? My first job was a paper round, age of 11. By 13, I was delivering milk between the hours of 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. 6 days a week. By 18, I was working in Home Depot, and so on. At 20, I was cleaning tents and caravans in the south of France. I had a whole series of crummy jobs, and all of those crummy jobs taught me the value of work, the value of money, and to some extent contributed to my professional success. And I think that's so. If you look at it more from the perspective of how can I be productive and how can I work well in any environment, that's the way to be successful in financial services and in any other job.
So not necessarily just saying, I'm going to get the big job immediately right out of school.
And I think that this is the problem. I think this is very much the problem with what I would call directed career guidance. Mm-hmm. I think the emphasis needs to be less on what jobs will we have in 10 years and how can we prepare people for that. And it needs to be more on the individual and helping each individual grow their own skill set and find careers in the things that they're passionate about. So it's more, rather than looking at it from the perspective of here's a job, how can we fill this with a person, looking at it as here's a person, how can we prepare them for the world of work? Mm-hmm. And then let them make their own choices. Because we don't know, the reality is, we don't know 10 years from now what
absolutely.
the employment market's going to look like.
That's,
we just can't.
To your earlier point, the world is changing, and if you have a skill set, that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. And if you're doing something that you're passionate about, you're going to be really good at that thing. And that gets lost in this discussion. You know, when I used to go into schools and give career talks mostly about becoming an accountant, they stopped asking me mostly because I said, you know, you want to...
Don't be an accountant.
Well, I didn't quite put it like that, but I said it's a lot of hard work and you need to think about whether this is something you want to do for 10 hours a day, 5 days a week for the rest of your life. And, you know, I personally chose not to. Mm-hmm. And I think that worked out well, but this is why I say, if you are passionate about what you do, and you do it well and you hone your skills, you'll find your place in the workforce. Mm-hmm. But if other people try to direct you down certain paths, there's a good chance that you won't excel in that career path and you won't really know why. And there's a good chance that you might feel quite disenfranchised. And the reason is that you didn't choose that path yourself.
Mm. We have about a minute left, and what I'm hearing from you haven't used this word, but I'm sensing it from you, is that you're encouraging people to be entrepreneurial in their outlook and not to say, well, Cayman's a centre of financial excellence, therefore I must be in the financial industry. You're
Absolutely.
encouraging people to take risks. And perhaps in a very brief answer, do you think our system as it is today, whether it be the trade and business licensing system, the work permits, whatever it might be, actually encourages that small entrepreneurial endeavour?
No, and I think the world of entrepreneurial is changing very rapidly, and I think that needs to change.
Interesting. Well, that's perhaps as a topic for another show. We'll talk about for a whole 30 minutes on the topic of entrepreneurialism. But we are very close to the end of our show. So, Steve, if I may, thank you incredibly much for coming in and joining us. It's been a pleasure having you with us today. And thank you as well, Christoph. We have very few announcements to give this week in terms of no investment forum, which was a couple of weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, and was very well attended. So thank you to any listeners that joined us on that. But let me thank everyone again for joining us and tuning in, and remind you that if you wish to hear a podcast of this show, it will be available in a week or so's time on the CFA Society Cayman webpage. And if you have a topic or question or matter that you want us to discuss, or something you want to discuss with us about today's show, then either send us an email at moneysense@candw.ky, or for those who are more technologically advanced than I, send us a Twitter tweet through to @MoneySenseRadio. With that, thank you once again. Goodbye, and please do tune into Money Sense in 2 weeks' time.
Money Sense is brought to you with the support of OneTradeX. OneTradeX, the Cayman Islands' #1 choice for online brokerage.